Well, that sound means that it's another episode of our podcast for Essential Dynamics. And I'm drawn to this microphone to say, is Derek Hudson there?
Hey, Derek's in the building. Excited to be here.
Derek's in the building. I'm really glad because he's our leader and guru. Welcome to Essential Dynamics. I'm Reed McCollum, your incredibly good-looking host. And Derek Hudson, what is exciting about today's podcast?
What's exciting about today's podcast is it's Bruce Alton number 2, long overdue.
Oh, Bruce Alton is back. You know, some people just can't get enough of us. That's really kind. You may remember Bruce from his last podcast when he considered me his best friend.
So it's great. Yeah, it's even despite that, he's back. So Bruce, welcome.
Back. Yeah.
Hey guys, Reed, Derek, great to see you and talk to you again.
So Bruce, I just want to set the stage a little bit because it's been a while. Bruce and I had offices right next to each other for 5 years.
Ooh.
And the number of times that I was in his office or he was in my office, we were in the hallway, writing on the whiteboard about all our amazing, cool ideas. You know, that was just a fantastic experience that I really enjoyed. It was one of the great things about working at Microline at the time. So here we are back. And I think Bruce and I want to just kind of whiteboard today.
Okay.
I think the whiteboard is one of the most important business tools out there.
So, Bruce, let me get started. Let's put the subject on the table. When I was working on the basic concepts of essential dynamics, I got to the path, which is systems. And when I think systems, the first thing that comes to my mind is constraints and the theory of constraints. And just in previous episodes, we talked to Kristen Cox about constraints. But because we're looking at dynamic forces, in my mind, the opposite of constraints is drivers. I haven't found a lot of material on drivers, and I'm still exploring it. And I know it's really kind of a world that you work in to some degree. So what are your either your ideas or questions about drivers?
Well, excuse me, when you asked me about that and if I would be interested in talking about that, it actually really triggered some thoughts in my mind about what does that actually mean for different companies and organizations. And I think it's a really important question to ask because it's one of those kind of first principles thinking that can be applied. I mean, I was thinking about it in the context of the product opportunity mapping framework that I have. And when I kind of thought back about like, what are the drivers related to that? And I kind of realized that when I spent 30 years in product development, revenue generation, new business development, and I'd done a lot of product development. And so today through product opportunity mapping, I help companies spin products out that are different from their current, core businesses. And when I kind of put it all together, I kind of put this framework together and I thought I had to show, this really comprehensive document. And I think there's, might be 50 different exercises and case studies and things. And I thought that was it. That's what I had to go out and tell people about and what they had to, what they had to look at and go through. But every single engagement, I'd say 99 times out of 100, it always came back to four questions they need to ask. And we've talked about this in the past. And so I realize, when you ask the question about drivers, those four questions are, and I can go through them if you want, but are the drivers of new product development. And then when you kind of think about it, I think that as there's drivers for any business. And I was thinking about it and, from a bunch of different perspectives. So Derek, I think you as a CA and there's drivers in being a CPA or a CA. Reed, you're a screenwriter or a playwright, and there's drivers to a business, or to a play and plot in a play or a movie or anything else. And I think you can apply it to you're, getting physically fit or dieting. Like there's these key drivers that you have to really pay attention to. So I think it's a really interesting question. And on the product side of things, if you're developing a new product, what I've discovered is it comes down to four key questions, four key drivers. And one of them is the first one is what problem you're trying to solve and is it worthwhile solving? The second one is, who's your customer and where do they exist? The third one is who's your competition, direct and indirect. And then the fourth driver is why you and why now? Like what's your secret sauce? And those were the four questions that no matter who I talked to, no, didn't matter the industry, type of product, scale of product, it always came back to those four fundamental questions. And I realized that's what you have to focus on. And addressing them or asking and answering those questions, you're developing a product it doesn't guarantee success, but what it does do, it really reduces the chances of failure and increases your product ROI and or the product development ROI. So that was really important for me because it wasn't obvious to me right away when I started on my product opportunity mapping journey, but I see it's just happening over and over again. So that was from the product side. So those clearly are the primary drivers. I should also add though that, if you're developing any product, those are the primary drivers, but there's also a series of secondary drivers, and they're more specific to the industry you're in and the product you're developing. So if you're developing a software product or a new podcast or some sort of physical product, you'll have these secondary drivers that are specific to the product itself or the industry that you're in.
So Bruce, if I could
want that defined.
Go ahead, Reed.
I'm just wondering, I want that defined, secondary drivers. I want to understand that better.
Okay, so primary drivers are the key boulders, first principles that will drive any product. Any product that you're actually developing, you have to ask those four things. Then there's a series of secondary drivers that are more specific to a product or an industry or a specific situation. So those drivers would be different, would change depending on what sort of product that you're developing. So as an example, if you're developing a SaaS software product, it's often, they have these secondary drivers about lifetime value, customer acquisition cost, churn, and all those things are specific to that industry. If you're developing a hardware product, the driver might be, bill of materials or distribution channels or something like that. But even if they're very different products, the primary drivers are always the same. So what problem you're trying to solve, customers, competition, and why now? What's your secret sauce? Those are universal.
What if your problem is selfish? What is the problem you're trying to solve may be selfish? Like all I care about is making a living.
Yeah, and I think that's
go to number two.
Yeah, exactly.
Who's the customer for making sure you have a living?
And actually, if your problem is to make a living, what problems can you solve for other people? So in your cases, are you trying to entertain people as a playwright? And so if that's the problem you're trying to solve, who's your customer? Who are you targeting that towards? Who's your competition? And you got tons of them with other playwrights and authors and everything else. And then the fourth piece is the secret sauce. Like why read? What talents do you have, that you can put into that piece? So I think those questions are universal when you're developing Reed's product for, whatever in order to make a living.
No, I get that. And I respect that. And I appreciate that. But you say there's a lot of competition and is it only the secret sauce that sets you apart? Or is it attitude? I have a new pizza, for instance. I want to deliver my pizza. I want to start a pizza company. For heaven's sake, shouldn't someone confront me and say there are enough pizza companies? Or do they encourage me and say, okay, yeah, you can be on there. There's room in the competition for you.
Well, I think it's all asking all four of those questions together. It's not one by itself. So recently my family and I, we went and we got pizza from High Dough, which is on 109th Street and kind of near the university, and also Sepp's Pizza, which is in that Leva space, 86th Avenue, 112th Street. One's a thin crust pizza, one's the thick crust pizza, and it's Philadelphia pizza or something like that, Detroit pizza or something like that. And I'm like, why are we going there, spending twice as much at a Boston Pizza? It's because, they literally have a good sauce, not a secret sauce, but a good sauce. They've kind of recognized their target market. They recognize, who their competition, why they're better. They understand who their customers are and how they market it, all those things. So I think you need to ask it, in that context, you need to ask everything together. But at the end of the day, you're right. Like why create another pizza joint? It's like if you had a startup and you said, well, I've got a new word processing software, spreadsheet software. I'm like, well, good luck
there
with
you
that.
Are. Yes, yeah.
Yeah, you're not going to compete against Google or Microsoft. So the point is, you can actually use these things and ask these questions before you spend a ton of money on product development, and it acts as a filter, because you might conclude, no, don't do it. It's a dumb idea. You're not going to succeed. So you can use it as a bit of a test.
Yeah. So Bruce, I'm interested in, like, your question was, how do you find the driver? And one of the things I'm really fascinated by Essential Dynamics is, start out trying to solve business problems, and then it gets more broadly applicable as you look at it. And that, I think, kind of reinforces the stuff that's sticky that might actually be true. So we're looking at, my mind, the driver is the natural force that's already there, that's, moving something forward. And as a marketer, if the driver is, I'm going to get in your face until you buy my product, it's the wrong direction, right? And so what are those, sort of natural things that are happening that you can tap into? And I don't know that this is really the case, but one of the close things that came to mind is a few weeks ago, we had Dave Bodnerchuk on. Dave, and
we grew up in the same neighborhood together.
I know,
same elementary school.
And Reed and I were in the same neighborhood, and it was only a university farm apart for the two neighborhoods.
That's right. As I recall it, we were bullied by you guys.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
So anyway, Dave's driver for Election Buddy was that these associations had to have elections and they couldn't gather in person because of a constraint, which was COVID lockdown. And so now all of a sudden there's this unsatisfied need that Dave's product can solve. Not every product has that just sort of like glaring, obvious, need. But I'm interested in, how do you unearth the natural driver that might be there that you can tap into rather than something that you have to force or create?
Yeah.
Another context is as an employer, or maybe even as a parent, you want somebody to do something, and you can, entice them or scold them. But as soon as the light goes on inside and they want to do something, then the world changes. So I'm interested in, trying to figure out how do you find the natural, force that's already there.
Yeah. It's a really interesting question to ponder. And, I look at, I'm familiar with what Dave is done and doing at Election Buddy. And I think, he was doing that before COVID came. And so you think, well, maybe that was circumstantial. But I think if you look at David's career, he's been really successful in a bunch of different industries. So I would maybe back it up and say, was it the market driver or the situational driver that is making Dave Bodnerchuk successful, or is it Dave? And where I'm going with that is, I think a lot of it, to answer your question, Derek, is about pattern recognition, and is really understanding an industry, the pattern going on, so you can see it when it pops up again, you can recognize it. And I think that you as a CPA is a really good example of that. Is, when you were the CFO of the company that we were at, and I have 100% confidence that if I gave you, for example, a set of financial statements for a company, or an income statement, balance sheet, cash flow statement, and maybe a few notes of the financial statements, or even better, I gave you 3 years worth of those statements, I am 100% confident you could review those. 20 minutes later, you'd be able to give me the red flags, yellow flags, green flags about that business. Like, I know you'd be able to do that. And I kind of think about that. Well, what was your career? So I know you have a business degree, and you took a bunch of accounting courses, and then you articled and you wrote that CA exam, which God forbid I would ever want to do myself, but you did it. You learned at it. You learned a lot studying for that. And then you worked for an accounting firm and you started auditing different companies' financial statements, et cetera. And then you became a CFO and you saw different industries, different, companies' stages of development. So all along the way, you were looking at the puzzle pieces and you were understanding the individual puzzle piece that you put together. You put all the pieces together, and then over your career, over 35 plus years, you can now see that pattern where it's just intuitive, right? And so I think that what you did and what I did on product development is you had all the individual pieces. Over time, you put together the puzzle, and then you see the puzzle, and then you take a step back and you look at, okay, this piece, and this piece, those are the drivers. And so that pattern recognition, I think, is very consistent. And if it's Reed, you're developing a plot outline in a play, or if it's your kids, you know how to treat them, you know how to motivate them in different ways. But you might not understand that with the first kid, when they're 2, but a kid number 3 comes along and it's 20 years later, I wish I had a redo because I know a lot more now with kids. So I think it's really just the benefit of experience. And so I think if you look at a guy like Dave Bodnerchuk, he just had that ability to see patterns. And then when COVID came along, he said, okay, I got to double down on this. I got to bet on this big time. And I think I don't know if that's what he did, but I certainly suspect he did. So I really think it's pattern recognition is a key part of identifying those drivers. And then the next question, of course, asked is, do you have to wait 30 years? Like, do you have to wait through all that whole experience to recognize those patterns?
To see it in hindsight. Yeah.
Yeah. How can you accelerate it?
No, you make a great point, and especially about, kids. And I know, for instance, in Derek's case, he has four adult children, of whom he's very proud. But what he doesn't talk about is the first 4 that he threw away. And
or that ran away
ran away. That's right. Yeah. So I think, Bruce, that pattern recognition is really interesting. And, it does come, in my case, there's a professional discipline. Like, I had a framework to work with, right? And there's some basic principles of accounting and my understanding of business. You talk about business model and stuff like that. And so there's that. One way to accelerate it might be to ask the question, what's driving this?
Yeah,
and,
for sure.
We had my daughter Jade on because I quoted her in an episode before she was on. And then I had to get her to confirm that she would have said what I said she would have said, which was, in the school system, the kids are fine. It's just what's the system trying to ask of them, and the job of a teacher and a coach, of youth is, what's the kid's internal driver, and how do you recognize that and pull that out? And for some, it becomes second nature, but you can start by asking the question, what's going to move this kid forward? What inside them can we channel, rather than what do we have to create out of nothing? Well,
and what complicates that is what really amazed me about my 3 kids are all boys, and how they all had the same parents, but they all turned out really differently. And so that driver for one is completely different for the second one, just completely different from the third one. So I think we're all biased by our own motive, own drivers, our personal drivers. Mm-hmm. And we try to put that upon other people, which sometimes works, but is often a mistake because it's the wrong driver. We're assuming we know what the driver is. And I think that's the same, I could advise you guys how to, this is how you diet or work out or something like that. Well, what works for you and what works for me may not work for you, and vice versa. So I think you need to ask the question, but I think part of that challenge is how do you articulate a driver? Like, if I asked you, what's your driver? Like, it's a hard thing to articulate, right? Like, it's a hard thing to really pull out and understand.
Well, let's put this to our drama guy, because isn't that the classic trope that the actor says, what's my motivation?
Absolutely it is. Absolutely.
So tell me, and you said that you're a method actor, so tell us.
Yeah.
It's made up, but it might be real.
I've studied it. I've gone through it. I spent a long time deciding what to do as an actor. And I often ask that question, what's my motivation as this character? And I find that the most effective answer is a paycheck.
Which is not true. which is because
you're right. It's not true.
It's not true because we get art. Like it's true for some, but where the real art is, it's not true because it's the story, it's the human drama. And
that's what makes it fulfilling. And that's what I'm leaving behind because I'm certainly not making money at it.
Yeah.
But Derek, could we have Bruce back for a third episode, please? I think we've got lots of stuff to talk about, but we don't have any more time.
I'm losing count. But Bruce and I have, we know we can talk about this for 5 years straight. So I'm sure we have content for one more episode.
I would love to come back. I think this is a really interesting question. A lot of people are interested in, and it's actually triggered a lot of thoughts in my mind. So I have more to say too. So thank you very much for having me this second time. I really appreciate it.
Oh, Bruce, you are welcome. Welcome at any time. We are grateful to have you. For Bruce Alton, Bruce, how would people find you if they needed to get in touch with you?
Well, for product opportunity mapping, the website is www.product-mapping.com, or probably the easiest thing to do is to follow me on LinkedIn as well, Bruce Alton.
Okay. Derek, how would people find you?
DerekHudson.ca.
That's it. Well,
that's
good.
It.
That's fascinating.
Although our guests are talking about LinkedIn, so we're going to send them a bill, but you can find me.
Yes, I'm on LinkedIn as well, but it's very lonely on that. But I just want to thank our guest Bruce Alton for joining us today, and as ever, Derek Hudson, our guru and leader through this path of essential dynamics. And also for Bryn Griffiths in the studio, engineering us to a good result. I'm Reed McCollum. Please consider your quest.